There'll be some showers around. I think on Saturday you're more likely to catch them across the northern parts of England. In the south it'll be brighter, and it'll be brighter also in Scotland. Temperatures 13 in London on Saturday, 7 degrees in the north. That is a hint of things to come, because by Sunday the wind crucially changes direction. It's coming all the way from the Norwegian Sea, pushing that mild air towards the south. So we're in for, I suppose we could call it a cold snap for Scotland, because there'll be some wintry showers across the northern hills, but single-figure temperatures as far south as the Midlands, maybe scraping 10 degrees, so a real chill in the air to come on Sunday. Back to you.
Thomas, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 6. The news continues here on BBC One as it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Sophie, thank you. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Thursday's edition of Look North. Our top story tonight. Counting the cost of COVID 3 years on from the first lockdown, we assess the continuing effect of the pandemic on our lives.
When I look at this picture, it was a really scary and distressing time, because obviously I didn't know if we were going to live or die.
We'll hear from a leading doctor in our region who says that the virus will be with us forever. Also tonight, medical staff say a rising number of young people are seeking treatment for serious injuries. Continuing support for Ukraine, we're with a convoy about to set off from Bremen on its fourth 3,000-mile journey this year. And from pit to stage, a new play about an old life in the region's coalfield communities.
Well, there's been some very impressive rainbows about today, and I think it's more of the same tomorrow. Join me for that detailed forecast.
Hello, thank you for watching. 3 years ago today, the country entered its first COVID lockdown. The virus ruined lives and livelihoods, but thankfully the development of vaccines and treatments has reduced the threat for most. While life for many has returned to near normal, the pandemic has cast a long shadow that still affects the daily lives of millions and has left the NHS with huge backlogs. The latest data shows that in early March, around 1 in 35 people, or around 161,000 people, were infected with COVID-19 in Yorkshire and the Humber. Since vaccines became available, nearly 11.5 million have been given out in the region. More than 19,000 people have died in our region where COVID-19 is mentioned on the death certificate. Most recent data shows that 49% of people lost their lives in the week ending 3rd of March this year. Long COVID adversely affects the day-to-day lives of 1.5 million people in the UK. In a moment, we'll be hearing more from a leading doctor in our region who says the virus will be with us forever. But first, here's our health correspondent, Jamie Coulson.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
They're just stripping the shelves of basic foods. We just need to stop it.
We see a lot of death. We see a lot of patients who can't see their relatives, so we have to be their relatives for them.
It was an invisible enemy that threatened all our lives. A new virus that began its spread into every home, hospital and high street. In a few short weeks, it changed how we all lived our lives, in some cases, forever.
When I look at this picture, it was a really scary and distressing time, because obviously I didn't know if we were going to live or die.
In December 2020, Kelly Day was admitted to hospital in Leeds with COVID-19. The 53-year-old spent a total of 31 days in hospital, 11 of which were in intensive care.
Hello, Mrs. Day.
We first filmed Kelly on a COVID ward just before she was discharged home. Since then, her recovery has been slow, despite support from a long COVID clinic. She still has daily struggles, both physically and emotionally, from her ordeal.
It's a reduced fraction of how I used to live, how I am living. It's made me disabled. Because I can only walk so far. Can't do much. I want to do it, but my body won't let me.
Infection from the virus was indiscriminate, but it was the elderly and vulnerable who faced the greatest risks. In England alone, more than 186,000 deaths have been recorded, where COVID-19 is listed as one of the causes. It was the development of vaccines and effective treatments that helped turn the tide.
So good morning, Anne.
Professor Dinesh Saralaya is a respiratory consultant at Bradford Teaching Hospitals and part of a team that bore the brunt of successive COVID waves. He also led a research team that played a vital role in delivering 3 vaccine and 7 treatment trials.
We must be very proud of our work, and today we are in a much better place thanks to all the research that went on. We save lives every day. These patients, if we didn't have treatments or have vaccines, we would be still see people dying from COVID-19. Thankfully, that number is very, very small.
Many people talk about the pandemic almost as if it's in the past. What is your view on that?
So the COVID is not in the past tense, it's still amongst us. We're still not completely out of it. We're still seeing patients with COVID-19. The illness is much more milder than we first saw it 3 years ago. So the virus is still circulating, but because we have a very good vaccinated population, as well as an immune population, we are not seeing the harmful effects as we saw in 2020.
In the 3 years since the first lockdown, the virus has exacted a terrible toll in terms of the lives it's taken and those it's damaged. And while the threat of COVID has been weakened, the virus has not yet gone away.
Jamie Coulson there. So where are we in terms of the pandemic and what is likely to happen going forward? Well, Jamie's been speaking to Professor John Wright, who's the director of the Bradford Institute for Health Research.
Well, this is a virus that's here to stay, and one of the things we need to do is to learn to live with it. And it's joining the ranks of many other viruses, non-pandemic or endemic viruses that circulate through our population, often in waves, often by season.
How much risk does this virus still pose?
So it's going to be with us forever. I remember talking to one of your colleagues shortly after lockdown 3 years ago, and she asked me, when will this be over? And I said, never. And she was a bit stunned by that, but it is something that we have to learn to live with.
In terms of the damage it has done, how bad has that been? Not just to those people who were infected, but also to wider society.
So we can think of it as different layers. So if we consider the pandemic as an earthquake, those closest to the earthquake are the ones who tragically died, almost 200,000 people in the UK. But another 10 times that number, 2 million people are still suffering the effects of long COVID in the UK. At a layer above that are the people who are affected by the economic consequences, the severe recession that's caused, so possibly 20 million people. So you can see these layers. And we're going to get the aftershocks of this for many years to come.
Why was it that some areas had such a tough time with this?
I mean, that's one of the stark findings from the pandemic in reflection, is why some people were worse affected, in particular poorer people, both by the virus but also by the economic fallout for it. And I think it's something fundamental for us as a country to stop and reflect. You know, when we look at the science and evidence, countries that are more equal tend to do better in the pandemic.
If we had another pandemic or another variant of this virus, how prepared would we be?
Well, we've learnt a lot from this one, often through bitter mistakes, unfortunately. But I think we are much better prepared through trial and error for the next one. You know, we'll see mutations in this virus, and some may be milder forms of COVID-19, some may be more severe. We just don't know what to expect for that.
When you look back over the last 3 years, back to that first lockdown, what are your abiding memories?
It's easy to forget how terrifying it was 3 years ago. You know, to this day, we had this lethal virus hurtling towards us. I think one of the abiding memories for me, which I think is really important, is to think back to that first lockdown and to remember the community connectedness and resilience that we had at that time, and to celebrate that.
Professor John Wright talking to our health correspondent Jamie Coulson. Next tonight, 4 men have been charged with murder after a 17-year-old boy was stabbed at a house in Armley in Leeds at the weekend. Trust Gaganta died in the early hours of Sunday morning. West Yorkshire Police say the men aged 18 and 19 are from Bradford and Huddersfield. Now, sadly, tales of knife crime involving young people in our region are far too common. Yesterday, you may remember, 2 teenagers were convicted for the murder of 15-year-old Kyrie McLean in Huddersfield. He was treated at the major trauma centre at Leeds General Infirmary before he died. Staff there have been told us they're seeing an increasing number of young people needing treatment for serious injuries after being involved in violent crimes. Carla Fowler now can tell us more.
This is a really busy trauma unit. The staff here are dealing with the most serious injuries right across Yorkshire. And they're telling us they're seeing more and more young people with injuries made by weapons. They're telling us increasingly they're seeing teenagers, some as young as 14 every week, who have injuries caused by knives, machetes, even guns. We spoke to Dr. Alice Downs, a consultant in paediatric emergency medicine here, and she told us it is getting very common and is very worrying.
We're seeing young men who are presenting having been attacked with machetes. They might have had, for example, their arm cut off. They might have had a machete attacking the head. We're seeing people who stabbed each other in the back or in the front. It's really a very wide range of injuries, and also some gun crimes, so people who've shot each other.
Carly, you mentioned the mainly teenagers, and we know one as young as 14. What more can you tell us about the age range of these young people who are getting involved in this kind of activity?
Well, we know that this particular trauma unit is seeing at least once every month a child under the age of 16 with an injury caused by a knife. Dr. Downs mentioned she's treated patients as young as 14 and even heard about primary school age children carrying knives. When it comes to older teenagers, 16, 17, 18 years old, it becomes even more common. They're seeing cases several times a week, especially at weekends, and you can imagine the effect that treating such serious injuries on such young patients is having on the staff here.
It's very distressing for the staff involved as well as the families. It's horrible to think that these injuries have been deliberately inflicted by one human onto another human. And we then have the thought in our minds of, like, when's it going to stop? Are there going to be repercussions? Because we do know that if one person comes in from a violent crime somewhere out in the community, there might be somebody else doing a revenge attack, and then that's concerning.
So treating injuries, saving lives, that's the immediate priority, clearly. But beyond that, what kind of work is happening to help these young people once they're discharged?
Well, that's really important, isn't it? Especially when the staff at the hospital are saying they're worried about retaliation, about revenge attacks for the injuries they're treating. Well, Leeds actually has youth workers based in the hospital. They're funded by the West Yorkshire Violence Reduction Unit, and their role is to provide intervention and support for any young person who's been involved in a violent crime. And they've been telling us often the young people finding themselves in hospital in a situation of high stress, that can be the moment when they're open to making positive changes. Matthew Guest is the lead for what's known as the A&E Navigator.
We'll either see them in A&E on the ward or make contact in the community with the young person, and then we'll do an assessment with them to see what's kind of going on in their life, what issues they have, kind of social, emotional stuff, educational, social things, and then we'll do referrals out to other services.
We know there are a lot of complex social issues involved here, poverty, deprivation and gang culture, but it is hoped a service of this kind can provide support to a young person wanting to make a positive change in their life. There have been more than 800 referrals to the service over the last 2 years. Some of those have been to the victims of violent crime, others have been to the young people who've committed those crimes, and similar schemes are now operating in Sheffield and Bradford.
Carla Fowler reporting. Well, Leeds, Sheffield and Bradford are 3 of the 10 areas identified by government as hotspots where incidents of serious youth violence are the highest. Police recorded almost 15,000 more violent or sexual offences involving a knife than they did a decade ago in England. As a result, many school pupils are now receiving extra support to help them avoid gang culture and violence, as Beth Parsons now reports.
These Leeds teenagers have recently had the opportunity to hear from people affected by knife crime and violence.
From a young age, I was getting into fights and stuff like that. I never really had anyone that I thought that I could rely on.
It's hoped that some of these real-life stories will make a real-life difference if they're faced with tough decisions in the future, decisions that could save a real life.
It scares me that there's so many people that have knives and act as a danger to other people. It's dangerous to everyone that they are surrounded by.
If we go back 10, 20 years, there wasn't such an emphasis on carrying weapons. It seems now for some communities it is just the norm, and therefore we need to break that cycle. We need to make sure that these young people that attend our schools in this local area are fully informed of what that decision could mean for them and the impact for the rest of their lives if they choose to make a bad decision.
You can get yourself out of a situation instead of getting involved.
This assembly at Bishop Young Academy in Seacroft is part of an early intervention project where people like Carl talk to the pupils and highlight how much of a risk carrying a weapon can be.
We want these kids to come away with having the ability and the knowledge to know when something's not right, to make the right decision.
I know if I carry this knife, if I show...
We need to educate them on not just maths and English, which are very important, but we also actually like the social stuff, so how we can de-glamorise stuff, where we can demystify all these trends that they're hearing on TikTok, social media, YouTube, or films or series that they're watching.
All this stuff that's been going through this person's mindset.
It's changed my perspective on a lot of things, especially when it comes to the exposure of knives and how students don't realise that a knife can change your life.
I think that it was very important for children like us to learn from mistakes or like accidents made from other people so that we can learn from it and we don't make the same mistakes as them.
Tragically, knife crime appears in headlines on a regular basis, but with more workshops like these taking place in West and South Yorkshire, it's hoped young people can be part of the solution in the near future. Beth Parsons, BBC Lit North, Leeds.
Okay, let's get some news in brief now. Officials from Wakefield have met with the Home Office this afternoon to challenge plans to use more hotels in the city for asylum seekers. A number of hotels are already being used as accommodation, which the council says is placing a strain on public services. The council leader says the government must listen to the people who know their communities and their limits.
It's not that we don't want to help. We're a compassionate district. We've taken quite a number of refugees and they have filled our hotels, but we're just saying we really can't take any more without some support.
Well, the Home Office says the use of hotels is a temporary solution and they are working hard with local authorities to find appropriate accommodation. In sport, Huddersfield Town Football Club is on the brink of new ownership. The club have confirmed today that contracts have been exchanged with a North American group of investors who will become the new 100% shareholders. Completion is expected in the near future, at which point the exact identity of the new owners will be made clear. Back in 2021, a year into lockdown, a group of young people from Bradford made a short film about the impact of the pandemic on their peers. Young in COVID, The Silent Pandemic won multiple awards. Now they've made a sequel about recovering from the pandemic and hope it will encourage more investment in mental health support for young people. Aisha Iqbal went along to the launch.
Never could have been thinking I would know what the future bring, all the highs and lows.
The restrictions and social distancing and those daily COVID briefings might have gone, but the impact of that period of uncertainty is still being acutely felt by a generation of youngsters.
Young people have definitely had to face a fight that no other generation has had to. I mean, none of us have ever lived through something like this.
Those who fell victim to the virus itself are still affected in both body and mind.
My health is much better now, a lot better than what it was 3 years ago. But unfortunately, there are some things that I'm still working on with, doctors. I'm going through some rehab and some therapy for long COVID.
The film shows the sharp contrast in the different coping mechanisms used by youngsters and highlights how some of them really struggled while others found solace in spirituality, among other things.
After the pandemic, after all the distractions had dropped away, and in Sikhi we have something called Simran, which I started to do during the pandemic because I was at home, I had all this free time, which was a blessing. Just sat and singing this mantra, it would just change my whole life, and that was my entry point into spirituality and into Sikhi.
This was such an important time. This was supposed to form the blueprint for the rest of their life, and unfortunately a lot of that has been riddled with anxiety and hardship and uncertainty. So it's about us really learning to understand what were some of the resilience and tools that they're using in their recovery, and what more can service providers be doing in order to enable better recovery.
3 years on, the new normal might have started to look a bit like the old normal again to a large extent, but for those who were forced to grow up through it, the reverberations of the COVID crisis will be felt for years to come.
Just don't get enough from me.
Thanks, Aisha. Really interesting perspective there. Next tonight, a Yorkshire charity is about to head off for the Ukraine, carrying hundreds of tons of aid supplies for the war-torn country. Yorkshire Aid Convoy specialises in humanitarian help for disaster zones. The war has seen it busier than ever, as Kathy Killick now reports.
Last-minute loading for an epic humanitarian journey. 10 trucks and an ambulance are rammed full of items wanted in Ukraine.
We've been blown away with what's been given to us. We've got mattresses, beds, food, feminine hygiene, all sorts of things.
Also on board are refurbished PCs from the charity Reusing IT. They're destined for schools and children that desperately need them.
We've got 1,000 desktop computers, and these are for internally displaced school children. So you can imagine a lot of the kids have been moved from the fighting areas up to other areas where it's much safer, just like the Blitz during the war. And they want to try and carry on as normal, continue their education, because they're going to be the generation that are going to rebuild that country once this dreadful war is over.
So we're straight off the ferry. We'll be driving all the way to southern Germany tomorrow. So
a highly dedicated team is making the aid convoy happen. All the drivers are volunteers. Mainly Yorkshire companies have donated the items, and the trucks have been loaned for free. It's an inspiring team effort.
The volunteers have ahead of them a 3,000-mile round trip, passing through 7 countries in 6 days, and that doesn't come cheap. Fuel and tolls will cost £30,000, all funded by donations.
it's a long time in the cab, so 3 days each way. So we've got radios so that we can communicate from cab to cab. So we've got extra sets of eyes for everybody so that they can keep each other safe. Yeah, and we might just, you know, have some quizzes over the radio. You know, just fun things just to try and keep the mood up.
A significant donation is the ambulance, which will be left in Ukraine once it's been driven there.
We were lucky enough to be able to buy it from the NHS when they've passed their sell-by date as far as they're concerned. But it's got the stretcher in the back, it's got various bits of kit in the back, it's fully functional, everything works. So at the moment, yes, it's full of water and crisps and a whole load of food and stuff, but when we get there, obviously we'll take everything out of the vehicle and then we will hand it across to the Ukrainians and the people that want to use it.
A homemade heart for good luck, and the convoy is on its way. It's the 4th journey in 12 months for the charity. They're getting it down to a fine art, and each time they go, they return ever more motivated. Ukraine needs them, and they'll keep up the effort as long as they're needed. Kathy Killick, BBC Look North, Beaucliffe Hall.
And we wish them the best of luck and a safe passage too. Now, coal mining might be a thing of the past in our part of the world, in Yorkshire and the North Midlands, but its legacy is vibrant. Now, a new play examining the tight community bonds which grew up around the pits is being performed at the National Coal Mining Museum near Wakefield tonight. Beneath the Banners weaves brings real-life coalfield characters to the stage. Tom Ingle got a sneak preview.
Nearly 15,000 miners converge. The show is called Beneath the Banners, after the ceremonial colours and intricate embroidery paraded as a rallying cry. Miners worked hard below ground and played hard above it.
Or it's cracking, that miners' place in Skegness.
Entire generations, entire communities grew up around the pits. This work is not driven by winding wheels, rather the winding yarns from those villages and towns.
And also reminding the audience, if we're going
For writer and director Nicola Pollard, it's personal.
My mum's grandfather and 2 uncles were coal miners in South Wales, and I grew up in East Kent where there were 4 pits. It has echoes throughout generations, you know, even if you didn't know your grandfather who might have been a miner, it will have had an impact on your parents, which has an impact on you. So there are definitely personal elements for me and for a lot of the audience.
And I think you're the one person who can tell me
what things?
What the men were like and what happened with Grandad.
Eleanor Larson was born after the play is set. Just like the character she plays, the threads of the story are new to her.
We've been going around to these places where mining and coal mining were so integral to these communities, and it's something that really was a source of pride, because there is pride in the work they do. They powered the country for a really long time.
The pits are gone, but the emotion remains.
We feel little tingles go around the audience when certain things are talked about. And people come up to you afterwards and say, oh, my granddad did this, or my dad did that, or I was one of those guys that you're talking about. I remember that. We used those terms. So it really resonates with people that have still an attachment to the mining industry of the past.
You're Carol's daughter.
Yes.
Beneath the Banners is on at the National Coal Mining Museum tonight, and then in Wetherby on Friday and Skipton on Saturday. It could be right at home in so many places in our part of the world. An era has passed, but it is not forgotten. Tom Ingle, BBC Look North at the National Coal Mining Museum.
Yeah, it still ignites the passions, doesn't it? And that looks like a really good production as well. Wish them well with that. Well, I thought the weather wasn't too bad. We had a rainstorm earlier, but it has felt milder. But I do fear, Paul, things are going downhill because an Arctic blast on the way. Is that right?
Well, it's a very mini Arctic blast. I think it'll be cold for 24 hours on Sunday into Monday, and then by Wednesday we've got the milder air coming in from the southwest, so just a little blip. Let's have a look at some of the pictures you've sent in. I think this is absolutely magnificent. Look at that rainbow right across Sheffield city centre. Thanks so much for sending that one in. And I thought this was lovely too. A lovely part of the world, Caton Bay. Lots of rainbows around today. I'll be back on tomorrow, so send your pictures in and try and get them on the telly. Twitter, Instagram and the Weather Watcher website is where to send them. So I think it's more of the same tomorrow. Sunshine and scattered showers. Some of them will be heavy with the risk of thunder during the course of the afternoon. But just like today, some spots will miss them all together. So low pressure in charge, as you can see. As Phil's alluded to, we have got somewhat colder air to come down as we head into Sunday. First day of British summertime, of course. Monday looks fine, and then the southwesterlies get back in Tuesday and into Wednesday of next week. Now, this is a radar picture. We've got an area of rain, actually, that's developed in the last few hours. It's just actually coming into the North Midlands, parts of South Yorkshire. To the north, we've got one or two heavy showers, so it's pretty unsettled this evening and at first tonight, with the risk of some heavy downpours. But just like last night, most of those will be out of the way by first light in the morning, and we'll see temperatures around 5 or 6 degrees. So tomorrow's high water times, there we are in Filey at 6:01 and again at 6 minutes past 6. So one or two showers in the west first thing. Otherwise, it's another lovely start with some sunshine, all parts dry. But I think we will see those showers breaking out, moving up from the southwest. So quite a showery afternoon. One or two of those will be heavy with the risk of thunder, but a good deal of sunshine in between. Quite a windy day once more. And we'll see top temperatures 14 Celsius. That's 57 Fahrenheit. Saturday looks quite cloudy with some patch outbreaks of rain for a time. Sunday, cloudy, damp start, brighter later. A lovely day on Monday. And then look at those temperatures, Phil, taking off towards the middle of next week. That's the forecast.
Hey, summertime's coming right in on cue, isn't it? And the clocks go forward, of course, this weekend, don't they? That's as far as we go for now. Thank you for tuning in tonight. From all of us on the programme, enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening. Have a very good night.
Make your drive home the best hour of your day.
Join us for a great time on Going Home with Vic and Jordan.